Hello again, and we are back. Our final session of the day is Empowering Truths, Navigating and Redefining Black History Education and Institutional Accountability. And it promises to bring some truth-telling alongside storytelling. This discussion will focus on the imperative to embrace an accurate and comprehensive portrayal of Black history in schools. We will explore the pivotal question of who holds the authority to decide what is taught and the complexities of decision-making and curriculum selection while dissecting the fears that may hinder the teaching of Black history. Drawing on some recent revelations here at Webster University, where new information about our own history of the first enrolled Black students has come to light, we will examine how untold narratives can reshape institutional understanding and foster a commitment of inclusivity. To help us examine these questions, please welcome our moderator, none other than the Carol Daniel, senior producer and host of 9 PBS, as well as our panelist, Dr. Sharonica Hardin-Bartley, who is the superintendent of the School District of University City, Robin Jefferson Higgins, who is director, chair, and associate professor of law, crime, and social justice here at Webster University, Dr. Jody Soul, who is president and CEO of the Missouri Historical Society, and Dr. Annie Stevens, adjunct professor here at Webster University. How about a round of applause for them all? And take it away for me, Carol.
Vincent, thank you so much. It's always a joy. Hey, Chief. It's always a joy to come to Webster University, and every time I come, I reflect on the fact that I tried to get my son to come here. I tried again and again and again, and he finally said to me, "Mom, stop wasting your time. I don't want to go to college." He did go, but I don't want you to spend your money on college education. So he is working. Thank God he is not in my basement. But I do, yes, girl, that's quite an accomplishment. So I definitely love this campus and all that I know who are employed here. Dr. Simone Cummings, who is the head of the Herbert Walker School of Business, is a dear friend and historic figure in her own right. So I so love Webster University and all that it does. And this conference is something that is so very impressive because we are talking about something that many don't want us to talk about at all. And so to Dr. Strobel, thank you so much for having this, and to Vincent, thank you for all the hard work, the sleepless nights, and for promising me dinner. He didn't promise me dinner, but he's good. He's good for it. He's good for it. I want to start with some quotes because I love a good quote. Learn from yesterday, live for today, hope for tomorrow. The important thing is to not stop questioning, said Albert Einstein. The poet William Wordsworth said, life is divided into 3 terms, that which was, which is, and which will be. Let us learn from the past to profit from the present, and from the present to live better in the future. And journalist, activist, and researcher Ida B. Wells, who traveled internationally, as we know, shedding light on lynching in the South. She was telling international audiences what was going on in the United States. She confronted white women in the suffragist movement who ignored lynching. She was ridiculed and ostracized by the women's suffrage organizations in the US. Ida B. Wells said, the way to right wrongs is to shed the light of truth upon them. So we start with those 3 foundational quotes and those 3 foundational principles that we need to learn from the past, that we need to shed light on the future. I tried to find a rap lyric talking about history, but I found all kind of rap lyrics, but I couldn't find one talking about history. But rappers know the past because they definitely focus on those whose shoulders they stand on. Every musician, every artist does that very thing. So they are always looking back in order to move forward. So let's talk about what we do mean. First of all, do the panelists, you have a statement, do you not? It looks like you have something that you want to say, first of all, and I do want to give you that opportunity to state your piece about this this particular topic that we're exploring today?
Well, actually, I have my cheat sheet here because I have quotations from Veda Lee Easter Butcher, which fit into the questions that you sent to us to pose.
All
So
right.
that's
Perfect.
That's my story.
Okay. We love a cheat sheet on a college campus. What do you think when you hear empowering truths? Because it seems that truth is something that we can't even all agree upon any longer. So, to my superintendent, what do you think when you hear empowering truths?
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here. I appreciate the invitation. I think about authenticity, and I think about fact, and also when we think about the origin of the word empower and how important that word is in so many movements, in so many aspects, so many sectors. Empowerment means strength, it means courage, it means hope. And truth is fact. It is something that can't be disputed. It can be questioned. It may not be understood, but it is fact. And I'm excited to engage in this conversation, particularly around Black history, because it is American history. And I think that is the narrative that we need to advance. It's not a separate, we are a part of the American history. And so I'm excited to explore that so that we can have meaningful dialogue and engage not just the children, but the adults who care for them and who teach them, who observe them, who judge them, who question them in meaningful ways to advance truth for all of us, because it's a all of us conversation.
And how many of you stop your TV, you pause it, you rewind because you may have missed the History Minute that Jody is doing? I know I do. You don't have to admit to that, but I do it all the time. It's really, I feel, opening our eyes to so much. Everyone that I see of the History Minute that you produce is something that I did not know and something that I'm edified by. So talk from your standpoint, empowering truths.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. That's very sweet. I also love Simone Cummings. We could have a whole Simone Cummings session. Empowering truths, I think one thing that I love about that is that truths is plural. There are many truths. And so I think what we're going to talk about today a lot is about making sure that multiple truths are told, that we're telling multiple stories from multiple perspectives. And that's where I think empowering comes in, because that is empowering to see yourself in the narrative of the past. I think the Missouri Historical Society has done both a good job in some ways of telling those multiple stories. We commissioned the Dred Scott portrait in the 1880s, and that was probably one of the first times the Historical Society had commissioned a portrait of an African-American man to say he's a leader in this community. But I will also tell you, when we did a civil rights exhibit a few years ago, my curators, if they want to do an exhibit about textiles, they can just go into the storeroom, pull out just about anything, because we have one of the largest textile collections in the country. But when it came to civil rights, we did not have those artifacts because we had not collected in the same way. We weren't interested. That may be too strong, but the Historical Society was not doing a good enough job of saying we want to collect things that speak to those truths. So that's a little bit of what I'm thinking about today.
I appreciate it.
I think this is on. Yes.
It is?
And Simone Collins. She's my colleague, too. So I'll insert myself in
I
her
started
story as
something.
well.
Okay.
So interesting, when I think about empowerment, I do think about hearing other voices, especially those voices that are never heard. We get a different perspective. You know, when we think about history, the name history is HIS, right? It's history. And it's usually written by someone from their perspective, and normally those people that are in power. So when we talk about giving other people empowerment, we're hearing from those voices that did not have power. We get to hear their side of the story and their truth. So that's what I think about empowerment for this particular panel discussion.
Ms. Cheat Sheet?
Well, the thing that comes to my mind about empowerment is in the Sisters of Loretto community, there is an often repeated phrase that trust empowers. And if we trust one another, we empower one another. And so if we look at history that way, all of our stories, learning from one another, hearing one another's experience, then we build more of that bank of trust. And so that's something that really is the empowerment piece from as far as I'm thinking about it.
Well, there clearly is a lack of trust, and I dare say there always has been in terms of how Black history has been taught, what has been said, how we have been portrayed. There's always been a lack of trust. So can we start there? How do we redefine Black history education in a nation that has never told the story properly, appropriately, kindly?
Yeah, thinking back in my own undergraduate years in the early 70s and my undergraduate institution where I was an English major, and it was a very heady kind of a new thing when we had a seminar that had never been taught before on women's literature. Wow. And most of the people in the seminar were women. So yeah, it was really an awareness piece. Every time that new voices are being included, some people are going to welcome it, and other people are going to say, well, there won't be enough time for what we've always done. And you know, one thing that I find particularly important here, and I said I do have quotes from Veda Lee Easter, later Dr. Veda Butcher of Howard University, who 88 years ago walked onto this campus and in the door of Webster Hall and up to the second floor to the West Wing where the music department was housed. And she walked through the door because it was opened for her as a young African-American girl, still in high school. And so in her late years, in the 1990s, she published an article talking about really her whole experience of being a lifelong educator, an ethnomusicologist, and someone who championed opening up doors for more and more people. And this is what she had to say. She said, "Courses in ethnic studies should not be merely the simple accumulation of facts, but the expansion of cultural horizons through critical engagement of different points of view. Standards of excellence can be ensured by requiring students to engage in serious comparative scholarship, the intellectual analysis of cultural phenomena, and the use of the finest products of human intellect and imagination as exemplars. Equity need not preclude excellence. On the contrary, no educational enterprise that ignores the history, the highest thought, and the creativity of a sizable segment of the national population could be called excellent."
Very nice. Very nice. So let me reshape the question for you a little bit. Do we even need to redefine Black history education, or do we just need to stand up for it?
I think we need to do both. So we need to stand up for it. It's the first thing you need to do because so many people just want to ignore it doesn't exist. I think we need to define it because it's an integral part of United States history. And so the superintendent mentioned earlier is that it is all United States history.
Right.
And so we need to redefine it to include everyone. And we do that by mentioning that you have a group of people that participated in the society. We contributed to the society. We are responsible for the wealth of this society. We built this society. We have infrastructure because of this group of people. And so it shows that we are a part, that we are not just drags on the society. And so we talked about this political divide, is that so many people are so easy to say, look at them, they don't add anything. But our history tells us otherwise. And so you're not only teaching African-American students that they matter, but also their white counterpoints understand that they have contributed to the society. So I think we need a bit of both to say that we all matter, that we're all United States citizens, and that all the laws apply to all of us, not just some. And the wealth belongs to all of us, not just to some. And so when we think about some of these structures that are in place, we built the railroads, we built roads, we built structures. We have allowed people that are wealthy now to enjoy the wealth that we built.
And Jody, you've told us that the Historical Society did not collect artifacts from the Civil Rights Movement. And so from your perspective, it would appear that you don't need to redefine. You have to define in the first place because you don't have what you would need.
Right, and I think this is an area where I think museums are doing particularly well right now. I think museums have expanded the narrative. Certainly, we have something, African American History Initiative, that was founded in just the last 10 years. That's way too late, but it is taking on some of that work now. But I think museums are really leading in some interesting ways. I look at big museums like, Monticello, presidential museums, Monticello or the Hermitage, and the way that they are now telling the story of the enslaved people who made those places what they are, is incredibly impressive. And audiences are responding. One of my favorite stories, one of our staff went to a conference this summer, and it was a small museum out west. I can't remember what it was. A suburban museum. They were going to do an exhibit about redlining. And they were so nervous because they had mostly white visitors. They just didn't know how they were going to react to this. And so they had training session after training session after training session. This is what we're going to have to, here's the negative comments we're going to get and how we're going to handle it. Turns out they got no negative comments. And what they needed training on was crowd control because they were just overwhelmed by how many people wanted to hear these stories. And I think that's one thing that I want to make sure people understand. Every piece of research that I have done at the Missouri Historical Society, every audience research that I've seen says that people are hungry for these stories. So it's not that you're doing something, it's bottom line. This is what people want. People want to see themselves in this history, and other people want to hear these stories. And so it also makes good business sense for museums to be telling these stories and collecting these artifacts.
I mean, people who love history.
Right.
And hopefully they love all of it.
And they want all of it.
Right.
And they're suspicious when they think it's being whitewashed.
What's it like on the ground in the classroom
So we are
as it pertains to defining Black history education?
I'm following you.
Yes. Yeah.
We are unapologetically committed to telling our history. And we evidence this by the texts that our students grapple with, the experiences that they have, and making sure that the stories that are told are authentic and that we can place them in place. And the impact, the washerwomen. How many of you have heard of the washerwomen and the rich history of the washerwomen? How many of you knew Sojourner Truth was a washerwoman? Harriet Tubman, a washerwoman. And the stigma that was associated with these women who paved their way, who were able to take care of their babies on their own land to provide for them doing a job or a task that was looked down upon, that was viewed to be less than, but they literally shaped the first organization to shape organized labor in this country, the washerwomen of the South. They had just been in bondage, but yet they used those experiences to advance what was best for their families. They were stigmatized, they were sexualized, they were abused. Those are the stories that our history American history. That is American history. And when we call it Black history, I get it, it's divisive. And it gives people an opportunity to opt out. We need to not allow the opt out because it will be erased. No one wants to talk about that history. And it's not just the negative connotation. There is pride in those stories. There's pain in those stories. And there's hope in those stories. And we must insist. My community does it. So you don't have to tell us to do it. We've been doing it since before. 1619 Project, Nicole Hannah Jones was coming to U City before she blew up. Now we can't afford her. So pre-pandemic, April of 2020, we had her scheduled before anyone knew what that was. So we have been leading this work. So it's not systems like mine. It's the systems where it is being erased. The systems where it is being attacked. If you all aren't standing up, if people aren't standing up and demanding that all of our American history is told, then shame on you.
And with that passion, don't put that mic down. Don't put that mic down. And this is not a question I sent them, but because you're so passionate and based on what you just said, I now want you to speak to people who say, and there are many of them who happen to look like you and me, who say, I don't want another slave movie. There are far too many of us, of African Americans, who do not want to watch another movie about slavery. We don't want to hear our history because it's so often portrayed in those difficult, challenging times only.
Well, don't watch a slave movie. Read Black Folk by Blair Kelly. Read The Sum of Us. I can give you some text. We don't have to look at fictional characters, the pain and the trauma to understand the history and the shoulders. I know the shoulders whom I stand on. I'm very clear about it. There's so many ways that we can embrace this conversation. I was watching the news this morning. The Red Line, one of the Supreme Court cases was right here on Labadee in the Ville neighborhood, the Shelley versus Kramer case. There's history. Now, that was a tragic situation with the family, but out of that came some legislation to help advance equal housing. So when we think about the woes that we're navigating as a society, all of the isms, racism, sexism, all of the social determinants of health, the fact that the life expectancy for people who live in the 63105 zip code, which is Clayton, versus the 63103, which is North St. Louis, is 17 to 18 years difference. So people who live in poverty in urban environments live less than their white colleagues or people who live in other areas. When we look at the birth rate of babies, let's talk about things that people care about, babies, that they die 3 times more to Black mothers, even Black mothers who are middle class like me. We have to understand that history. So when people say, I don't want to watch that, I don't want to see that, you need to understand where you've been so that you know where you're going. And the reality is you don't just get stuck there. You don't just stay there. You advance and use that knowledge to empower. You talked about empowering truths to empower our next generation. Because I'm not betting on us, I'm betting on them. I'm putting my eggs in that basket because they are our future, and I believe they are the game changers. We've been complicit. We've had some successes. We're harmonious. We come together. We feel good about ourselves, and that's great. But we're not aware of what's happening because we can't segregate ourselves, even Black folk.
Right.
We can segregate ourselves and not have to think about what's not happening in other places. So I'm going to say it again. We need to invest. We need to insist that our whole history, all of it, and I don't know how I can read about Huckleberry Finn and see the little picture, the gray guy, I can go on, but we can't talk about the washerwomen of the South.
All right. I want to ask you about the psychological effect of not knowing one's history, but can you, oh, this is not a question I sent you either. Can you overlap a faith journey and understanding history? I know you can.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to now, aren't I? Well, you know, for the last 2+ years, I was the lead researcher for the Loretto Roots Enslavement Project, which basically meant that for the past 2+ years, I studied the family trees of most of the persons whose names are engraved upon the memorial stone dedicated almost 25 years ago at the Loretto Mother House in Kentucky, who were enslaved by Loretto in the first 50 years of the congregation's existence. And I came to have a very deeply, profoundly respectful awareness of how people did manage living and how people did continue to grow and have children and have grandchildren, and there are about 20 living descendants of these several families that I found particularly a lot of information about, and many of them, most of them, maintained a faith journey. Many of them are Catholic, many of them are Protestant, and a few of them are even Nation of Islam. But they have a faith journey. And that's one of the things that they valued faith, they valued education. Many of them became teachers, second, third generation after the Civil War, and they maintained contact with one another. One thing that also I was very profoundly moved by was that in the 1870 census, 2 of the families who had been for years enslaved at the Mother House, they owned their own farms 5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation in Kentucky went into effect, and they thrived. Well, I think that there were probably ways that people helped one another. And I say, thanks be to God. And so part of this continued lifelong process of conversion that we are all about, we're looking for a better world, a better life, the promised land. We are looking for ways to become more authentically who we are. And that's a lifelong project, and none of us have gotten to heaven yet. So, but yeah, it's something that is profoundly, intertwined together: the spirit, the soul, the mind, the body, we're on the journey.
Amen. Amen. And you did that without a cheat sheet. See.
No cheat sheet.
See. I saw a story yesterday on CBS Mornings. Nate Burleson's wife, if anybody saw that on CBS, his wife's ancestors had 3 businesses on Black Wall Street in Tulsa, and they went, and a hotel, a barbershop, and a real estate company. And she had recently learned this. But one of the things about the story that stands out to me as we are talking this afternoon is that as those blocks and blocks and millions of dollars worth of businesses and homes were destroyed by the white mob and the government, the United States government, that as Black people fled, they chose, we believe, not to talk about it out of fear that they would further upset white people and that they would come for them again. And so when I ask you, Jody, what's the effect on us of not knowing our history, I think about the fear that those families had. Who are we as a people, Americans, not knowing, really knowing the good, the bad, the indifferent, the ugly, the joyous, the painful of our history?
Right. Well, then we are ill-equipped to face the present and plan for the future if we don't know that history. And if we don't see ourselves in that history, so I think about a lot about local history. If we don't see ourselves in the history of our communities, then we are not going to invest in those communities. So knowing this history is vital to democracy. This is the only way that a healthy democracy survives. And we have our own Tulsa story, right? I mean,
Right.
we have the East St. Louis race riots, and I will ask people in the museum, how many people have heard of the East St. Louis race riots? And they're very small numbers, higher numbers here, but smaller numbers on the general public. And I sometimes make connections with Ferguson
Right.
because I know people think Ferguson's going to remember forever. It's going to be in my kids' high school history textbooks. Well, there were national protests about the East St. Louis race riots.
And they're not.
There were experts coming in from all over the country, and yet that's slipping away. That's being forgotten. It's incredibly important to healthy communities to know your own history. And we have all of those people, all of those giants that shoulders we stand on. I mean, we have Annie Malone, who's one of the country's first African-American female millionaires. We had lunch counter sit-ins here in 1944, 16 years before those Greensboro Woolworth counter sit-ins, that if you look at your high school textbook will oftentimes say that's when the sit-in movement started. You know, and you talked earlier about people who don't want another movie about slavery. I do think it's important, you know, I'm very proud of that civil rights exhibit that we did, but if every exhibit that we do about Black history is about civil rights and slavery, that is also a limiting narrative. So, you know, we did an exhibit a couple of years ago about St. Louis's music history. That's an African-American story. That's a story of Scott Joplin and Josephine Baker and Fontella Bass and Tina Turner and Chuck Berry and Nellie and Willie Mae Ford Smith and people like Henry Townsend, who should be known but aren't known, one of the best bluesmen of all time from St. Louis. Those are stories that need to be told. And so it's about not limiting the narrative. It's about expanding that narrative, but also telling stories of Black joy and everyday Black life. I just ran into Paul Ward from Kirkwood this weekend, and I remember we did an exhibit about African-American Kirkwood, and he told this story that I still remember. I talked to him about this weekend. This was 12 years ago, 15 years ago. He talked about damming up this creek with concrete, and they made such a big pond that the city services had to come in and jackhammer it out. It's like, that's a story of everyday life that needs to be told as well. That's also part of telling Black history.
And when I ask you about what's the impact of not knowing, it is today, 2024, Beyonce makes history, first Black woman, country song, and Black country music radio, and Black and white country fans, some, far too many, lose their collective minds. And I saw an interview, might have been a podcast, might have been Fox News, I don't know, I didn't watch the entire thing, but this is the impact of not knowing our history, that someone would say, and this is what they said, and I'm paraphrasing and somewhat quoting, they want to come in and take over. Speaking of Black people and country music, and not knowing the history, well, not knowing the history of music in this country.
Ray Charles made the best country album ever.
And not knowing the history of the instrument that was brought here when y'all took over and went and got us and brought us here. So that's the impact of not knowing history, that we would get upset that Beyonce, of all people, who I've got silver shoes and silver purses, and so I'm gonna get some silver boots, because I'm a member of the Beehive, not really, but I respect her musicianship. What's your level? Because I'm uncomfortable and somewhat pissed off. I'm uncomfortable. What's your level of disappointment, frustration, anger, shock, dismay at this movement that we will not teach history that makes children uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost a movement of anti-Black to me. You know, it's one of those things where you mentioned earlier about people who are tired of hearing about us being slaves or what have you, but it's also an opportunity for us to not teach about Black excellence. We've mentioned so many great people. When we think about, for example, no one knew that it was a group of Black women who were responsible for putting the mathematical calculations and formulas in place so that NASA could fly in, their spaceship and land on the moon. And so it was a shock. No one knew about, and the title's important because it says hidden figures, because these people were hidden to society as a whole. And so it's just this absence of Black excellence. And so our students are not learning that they could be other people. And so not only Black students are not learning that they can do certain things, they can be scientists, they can be inventors.
Because we were.
Because we were and we are. And we've created so many inventions that we use today. When you were driving here and you were driving through the stoplights, guess who created that? A Black man. And so we don't even know that these are everyday things that we see that we're responsible for. And so you're teaching our children then, because they don't see it. And you're also teaching their white counterparts that these children can't do these things. And so it's really problematic in so many levels, because Black history is more than just teaching about slavery. It's also teaching about those people that overcame slavery and became these great individuals. And so we can do the same thing. And so we're absent in that. So to me, when they talk about being uncomfortable, do you think that Black children are comfortable hearing about the atrocities of slavery in their classes? No, we're not. And so it's only about their comfort level. Well, what about our comfort level? We have people in our families who lived in slavery. My grandmother picked cotton. And I'm sure there's other people that in families who can tell stories. And so when we talk about being uncomfortable, for whom then? I mean, we should be uncomfortable as well. So that's where I am on that. So I just don't understand avoiding something that seems to be uncomfortable. History is going to be uncomfortable. But what's the saying? If you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it again. So we need to know about it.
Right. What was when you were studying and researching, it was a faith journey for you. Was it uncomfortable to learn what you learned?
Well, being uncomfortable is not one of the 7 deadly sins. And in fact, the lifelong process of conversion and coming to be aware of who you truly are called to be, it's like birth. Birth is not a comfortable thing either for the baby or the mother. And yet we're all here somehow that way. And I was thinking about a year ago, I took a trip down to Louisiana, tracing some of the places where Loretto had been, and also tracing some of the, civil rights and other exhibits. Went to, Alex Haley's house in West Tennessee and so on. And the one place that stood out so much was Whitney Plantation in Louisiana, not too far from New Orleans. And it is based upon telling the story of enslavement from the perspective of interviews that were done in the 1930s by the WPA with elderly African Americans who had been children before the Civil War. And so they told their stories of what they remembered from being children. And you go into the plantation area, you're given a set of headphones, and their voices are telling you right there in your ears as you're walking around the different spots. And artists have made 3D statues, sitting, standing, playing, of the children of the age they would have been then. And the really impactful aspect of that is enormous. Then you go back to the visitor center where you see artwork that has been made by today's school children of parts of New Orleans, all races. They have been schooled in this story. They have been brought to this place. They have taken it in as 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, and they have created artistic responses to that experience. That's powerful. And that's the kind of thing that Veda Lee Easter Butcher advocates for in the use of the arts as a way of really getting the story. What
I think I hear you saying as well is that children can handle it. they can handle it.
Not only can they handle it, they want
They
it.
want,
they want
yeah.
to hear these stories. So one of the book that got me interested in museum work is called The Presence of the Past. These two researchers called Americans across the country and basically said, where is history engaging? Where does it come to life? And then the flip side, where is it boring? Where is it dull? And my teacher friends are not going to like the answer, but the answer of where people said they found history to be boring and dull was classrooms. We know why that is. It's because it feels like a bunch of dates, a bunch of people we're not connected to. The place where they said they felt most connected to history was family reunions, family gatherings, because that's where they heard the stories of people like them. But one thing that they said that they also did not like about history classrooms was they felt like they weren't getting the full story. They felt like they were getting this triumphant narrative of America, and you weren't telling me the hard stuff. They want those stories. And so there's many loud voices saying, let's not share this history, let's push this history to the side. But they do not represent the majority of Americans or the majority of students.
I would imagine that you would spontaneously combust if a particular political party had its way and we had patriotic history education only, because that's what there was a momentary push for.
Right, because I think patriotic history is that complex history. You can be a patriot
about
and
that?
still wrestle with
How
all
about
of
that?
your past sins.
I gave a speech many years ago to of all places, it was the DEA, and my topic was my patriotism doesn't look like your patriotism. And whether you, on President's Day, go buy yourself a mattress, or you have a barbecue, or a six-pack, or you know, just because you fly a flag and you believe in the country, period, is your level of patriotism. My level of patriotism is just like it is with my marriage. I want my marriage to be better, so I question myself and I question him. What can we do better so that we can be more in love, perfect this thing? And so that's my patriotism and my love for my husband and this country, as the daughter of my late father, drill sergeant, who served in the Army for 28 years. What tools do we have? Because you have called on us, you've given us a call to action today, that it is not Black history, it is American history, and I think everybody here believes that. But talk about the tools we should use and already have in this current political climate.
I think we have our cultural institutions, a rich resource with the History Museum that we should frequent and visit. I think that we have educators that are on the cutting edge of this work, not just in my system. We're partnering with about 4 other districts, including the University of Missouri, St. Louis, but we're doing a partnership there with social studies curriculum and really looking at the resources that our students have access to. I would also say there is so much power in youth. And sometimes we just need to stop and listen and then respond. As adults, we sometimes need to get out of the way. And so in U City, we really empower our young people to be lead learners. We create the container. So we have an African American Studies course. We have that container, but we allow them to have choice in how they fill that container. So they're discussing the ideology of Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois. And that's huge. And these are freshmen, these are sophomores, juniors that are able to grapple and not necessarily just receive it as gospel. They're challenging some of the assumptions. They're challenging some of the ideology. But that is what education should be about. Criticality, that's a skill that we want our young people to have. And so that is the thing that gives me hope. That is the thing that inspires me around this conversation. And we really don't make it be something that's extraordinary. This is just what we do. And I think when we normalize the discussion of hard history, of our history, of American history, it's more palatable for those people who are afraid. Because what we're seeing in the political climate is fear. Right. Fear for the loss of something, and I'm going to argue that it's power. Yes. And so we have to combat that. And fear causes people to do things that are desperate. And we're seeing that play out. And I've always believed that education is the key.
Right.
So we have to make sure that our young people are educated and that they are prepared to combat the ignorance that is incited by fear and just a lack of understanding. So again, I keep emphasizing it is American history, as hard as it is, the beautiful things about it, the things that are difficult, but everything that has happened in the past has shaped where we are today. We all have ancestors, all of us. And they helped us be where we are. So picking and choosing what we talk about, how we talk about it, to whom we talk about, is just a dangerous practice that we should refute consistently.
I do want to get advice, and then we have time for some questions.
We are doing well.
Do we have? We're going to take questions, though, right?
Yeah, I will come back to you probably in about 10 minutes for a 15-minute.
Q&A. All right, perfect. What's the real danger here that we are facing by thinking that we can skirt the teaching of American history? What's the real danger here in your mind?
So the danger here, just not knowing, it's misinformation, it's telling untruths, it is not understanding who we are as a collective body. So that's the danger. And you're right, when people are afraid, they do desperate things, but they do outrageous things. So I look at some of our politicians, and some of the things they come up with is just outrageous because they're so busy trying to maintain power because they know they'll get points for just doing something that is so out of line. And so I think the real danger is just us not being able to have a relationship and have a true community because we don't understand each other. We're moving further and further apart.
Right.
Not understanding people that are different from you. It's also a danger when we talk about all of our institutions, when we think about policing. If you view people as inhuman, then that translates when people are policed, when they go to get health care, when they go to get housing, when they go to get employment. We have these issues with this bias where we may assume that I'm going to hire the white employee as opposed to the black employee because I feel like the white employee is going to work harder. So we buy into these narratives because we don't understand, because we don't see each other as being human. And so we've lost our humanity when we talk about how we treat groups of people in the United States. And now, at one point we thought we had made all of this strives toward, getting rid of, to a certain extent, racism, and it has really just brought out the worst of people lately with some of the language that is used, some of the allegations, and again, just polarized the society. When you talked about Beyonce, I'm like, okay, yeah, I went to her concert, she was great. So, but not knowing that she's not intruding on your particular genre. That was a genre that's been around long before it became predominantly a white genre. So that's the danger, is not being able to, if we don't get it together, we're going to wreck ourselves. I just really believe that we have got to be united. That we're in trouble, and so we need to make sure that we are going to be willing to listen and understand all sides of the story.
I remember reading an article many, many years ago that there is a sense in the country amongst your average middle income, lower middle income family that as long, and this is the part about the article that I will never forget, as long as they can go to Applebee's, as long as they can take in an occasional movie, as long as they can buy a new car every 5 or 6 or 7 years, that life was okay, and they really did not want to get into debates and protest living, and it didn't matter to them as long as their lives were all right, as long as they could go to Olive Garden. It was not Applebee's, it was Olive Garden. As long as you could take in an Olive Garden to get them Forever breadsticks, then this whole conversation we're having up here is just too much. And so you could have gone your whole life. Maybe others like you could go their whole lives. Webster could have gone its whole existence and not dig into its history, because inevitably, we're going to dig up something that is embarrassing, uncomfortable, negative. You could have gone your whole life and not done that. So what would have been the harm in going your whole life and not digging up this negative history?
Well, it wouldn't have made a very good plot line for a movie, would it? I mean, that's kind of like, any of us could decide that we're going to play it safe in any decision that we ever make, that we will never color outside the lines, that we will never take a risk on, this person that we're attracted to, or that we will move far away from our home families to take a job that just is going to open up our world. Yeah, it's one of the things that the people who tend to be less risk-taking are going to be okay as long as they can go to Olive Garden and get the free breadsticks forever, endless breadsticks. And, the people who are not willing to take a chance on life, love, adventure, whatever, they do continue to live that way. Now, for many of us, probably in this room, could go through the list of our lives. Well, we take a chance here and there, and some of them were kind of like stupid in 2020 hindsight, but we had the ability to make better decisions. Now, not everything, of course, is within our zone of being able to control it. Natural disasters happen, cancer diagnoses happen. I mean, things happen. But things that we can react or respond to, it's a difference between reacting and responding. How would Webster have been different if everything had just kind of stayed the same? And, well, I guess if everything had stayed the same, we would be a very small Catholic women's college on one block of the campus, which is now much larger than Webster Groves. And what would have been different if we had not unofficially desegregated through the music department for about a decade before the official desegregation date of 1947? What would have happened if, the music department of the early 1960s, when asked if they would admit some men for the first time as students, if they had said, "Oh, I don't think so, we'll pass on that," but Sister Eloise Jarvis said, "Bring on the men. We can't do jazz unless we have male students." And so, or if we had not taken the dare to, expand to, military campuses on bases around the country, if we had not taken the dare to establish the first European campus in Geneva and further afield, we'd be a lot smaller, and actually we would have been a whole lot duller.
Well said, well said. Well said. I love it.
So, Carol, we've talked about needing to learn this history so you see the tough stuff, and that's true. But I also want to talk about if you're not learning Black history, you're missing out on all of these inspiring people. Right. And so, like, one of my favorite people in St. Louis history is Charlton Tandy. Streetcars were segregated. Black passengers had to hang on the outside by the strap. And a woman fell, she was pregnant, fell to her death. And the court said, no, you have to let Black passengers inside the streetcars. These are horse-drawn streetcars. But the courts can say one thing. It's very different when the white driver is driving down the street and sees a group of Black passengers waiting to get on, and he oftentimes would just go by. And so what Charlton Tandy would do is he would jump into the street, grab the reins of the horse, make it stop. And then oftentimes the white driver would get off the horse and say, I'm not taking Black passengers. Charlton Tandy grew up with horses. So he got on the horse and finished the route so that those Black passengers could get where they went. Now, there's tough stories in there, right? Stories
died,
of segregation and people dying. But there's also a story of a hero, a person who's willing to jump into the streets and stop a moving horse. you have to be inspired by that, even if your issue is not civil rights. Your issue could be religious freedom or school choice or whatever, but you've got to be inspired by a man who believes so much in what he's fighting for that he'll stop moving horses in their tracks.
And I have a two-lane thought process here that I have said to audiences before that, to majority white audiences, that you lost out by not being next to me. Like you lost out. Racism didn't just hurt me. Prejudice, segregation didn't just hurt my ancestors, it hurt yours. So you lost out. But then the other train of thought is my husband and I have 2 sons, and I want them to be proud and excellent and therefore strong, that no weapon formed against them will. I mean, that's what I want for them, especially as black men in America. And so there's a part of me that I so respect this man, and I so respect that woman, the chancellor, Dr. Beth Strobel. I'm going to say that thing that white people used to say all the time. I have a black friend. I have white friends. You know, my producer in Cape Girardeau, white man, was in my wedding, right? So I went to my senior prom. Y'all learning all kind of stuff today with Tom Petty, who was a white guy, and he was several years older than I was as well. So it was quite the scandal. So I've got my bona fides in the white community, right? But there's a part of me that says, I don't care what you know or don't know. I need black people to know, Sharonica, I need black people to know that you have a rich history, because we're the ones that are 3 times more likely, our children in the city of St. Louis, to not make it to 1 year of age. Black women, I'm with you. I wanted a black OBGYN because I knew going into pregnancy that my pain would be discounted, because physicians in this country feel like still that black people can feel more pain. They don't see us as we come in talking about our issues, and they're discounted by white physicians. And so that's why I have that other lane, that I want black people to know their history. And so with my diatribe, when I'm always on a soapbox because that's my life. What's your advice to us, to parents, to students, to educators, to the public at large? What's your advice to us to take a stand?
I feel I'm being redundant. I think that
You're not being redundant.
there's power in our young people, and they are speaking. They are acting boldly with courage. And I know that Madeir, my grandmother, great-grandmother, when we went to Woolworth's on Grand and Olive, she would have a tear in her eye. As a little girl, I didn't understand why she had that tear. When I became an adult, she sat in at that place. So to be able to take me there as a patron was emotional for her. She didn't have a high school education, but the tremendous amount of strength that she possessed and knowledge. She's probably one of the most brilliant human beings that I know. That is the power of us insisting that this conversation is had. I too attended schools with people who did not really look like me. I was a part of the desegregation program, one of the worst examples of desegregation in our country. Not my thoughts, it's been researched, look it up. But because of that experience, my white classmates were able to see my humanity. Some of them didn't appreciate it, but they were able to see that this little black girl from the Ville neighborhood wasn't the stereotypes that they heard about and saw on TV, because that was all they saw. One little girl in 6th grade, she was trying to wipe the melanin off my skin. She had never seen a black person. She was one of my closest friends. That's why I say this is an all of us conversation. It benefits white children just as much as it benefits black children. But to your point, we have a community-wide book study right now in U City. It's virtual. Our next session is in person on Thursday. Shameless plug, U City High School, 6 p.m. we have more white attendees. And I'm in a majority black district, y'all. We have more white community members that attend those sessions. So I always ask myself the question, what is missing? How do I tap into children and families that look like me so that they are in front of this conversation and insisting and angry and infuriated? You said pissed. I'll use your word. She said it first. She said she's pissed. Like, why aren't we outraged by what is happening in our schools, even if you don't have any children? Because this is an all of us conversation, because this is about humanity. So that is what I have to say. We have to come together, and this is not, I don't politicize it. This is a conversation that is, it's truth, it's fact. And then you can interpret it and dissect it and have discourse and think critically about it. But it is what it is. And we must embrace it, learn from it, but not stay there, move beyond it. But we should all be outraged about what's happening, because now it's going to be what we teach. Next it's going to be something else. Right? So we have to really embrace that conversation. And local control, final thing, local control is local control. And we have to make sure that the people who are in local government for school boards, that they reflect what you value. School board members reflect the values of the community because you vote them in or not. So vote.
Absolutely. We're going to get some questions in, Jody, your parting advice, and we're going to get some questions from those of you who are gathered today.
Parting advice.
Parting advice.
Engage in these conversations. I mean, that's what you talked about, the people who just want to be happy on the couch or Olive Garden or whatever, but you will be happier, more interesting, more engaged. You will fall in love with your community the more you know about it. And so do that work. Go to those forums. Get involved. It makes for a richer life.
So I've had the opportunity to present. I teach legal history. And so I've had the opportunity to teach legal history, especially during African American Month, to a Jewish synagogue, as well as Central West End Church. And so I'm amazed at how many people want to listen and learn. And so these are predominantly white audiences. And so engage, learn what you know, give to other people, let them know what's going on so that they can take interest in what's really going on in our world. And so we have to stop letting this be a distraction. A lot of this is just distraction. We have a lot of things going on in this world, and really this is nothing compared to really the big problems that the United States face. So this is a distraction, and we have to realize that it is indeed a distraction, and it's a way for certain people to maintain power. We need to unite.
Well, my last quote is not from Veda Lee Easter. This one is my Old English major days. The poet W.H. Auden, all I have is a voice to undo the folded lie. So let's unpack that folded lie and get rid of it.
Wonderful. We thank our panelists, and then we're going to take some questions. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much.
First of all, I'm from U City, graduated. I'm very proud of you. But from a history perspective, can we start to also look at the why did a group of people from a northern region in Europe that lacked certain resources come and cause so much harm throughout the planet whenever they went into places where people who had resources and weren't trying to harm them lived? Can we start to learn history by asking the emotions and intentions and psychology of that time as well, so that we can start bringing forth some healing?
We absolutely can, and I think what we also need to do is then invite people into those conversations. You see that with students all the time. They do want to have these discussions. You have to invite them in. We just added interpretation to the Thomas Jefferson statue that's in the museum a couple of years ago. It had mostly been uninterpreted for 100 and something years. And we wanted to tell all of those stories some people said, don't talk about Jefferson being the third president and writing the Declaration of Independence. Everyone already knows that. Just talk about slavery and the horrors of westward expansion. And then later that day, I get a call from someone saying, don't talk about slavery and westward expansion. Everyone knows that. Just talk about Jefferson being the third president. I said, how about we do both? Right. But one thing that I love in that label is it just asks visitors questions. And one question says, can you be horrified by Jefferson? Can you be inspired by Jefferson's words and horrified by his actions? I don't have to tell you the answer. I can just invite you into that discussion, tell you the facts, and then have you be part of that discussion. So I think that's part of it too, is bringing people into those conversations.
Next question.
Next question will come from online. And first of all, online has been very actively engaged in here. Sharonica standing on your shoulders. Like, it's been great here. Question. Can the panel respond to the impact of the current HB House Bill 2619, which directly harms Missouri's workforce and economy by eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion standards in our state? It seeks to defund the DEI programming our state departments engage in, including reducing the learning and competency of Missouri professionals. That is just one anti-diversity bill of few. You have a response to that?
You've taught a legal class.
I like.
It's you. It's
I
you,
knew
dear.
it was gonna say, we're gonna turn to the attorney here.
Yes.
You know, it's shameful. You know, we think about employment situations where that is where a lot of that information needs to be learned, because we're working with one another. Your employment situation is where you have more diverse people working. And so wouldn't you want people that work together to understand one another? I think it's better for the company, because you'll have people that can come to work, don't dread coming to work, because they can relate to one another. And so it's problematic, but again, it's one of those things, those shocker bills, to make it appear that for whatever reason, we don't need to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but really we do. And it works well in many job places. And so it is what it is. I mean, Missouri's a red state, I'm sorry. And so this is what engages certain voters and the majority of voters here in Missouri. And so it's shameful, and I think it's problematic. But I'm trying to understand why, too, the government wants to reach into companies anyway. And so it's hypocritical, right? Because it's this whole ideal is that hands off, you know, states' right, this and that. But then again, but they're all, you know, government shouldn't be into your personal life, shouldn't overreach, but laws like that is indeed overreaching. You're reaching into the employment situation that a company now has done for years. And obviously the company is keeping these particular programs going because it benefits their bottom line.
Right. So yesterday on Channel 4, a 22-year-old, I guess her title is editor maybe, wrote a story about black home ownership. And she put the word, 22, she put the word colored in the story, and the anchor read it. And so there's a process that should occur, that the executive producer should be reading these things before they get to the front of the anchor. And I was a news anchor for 40 years, and you know you're gonna get landmines, so you have to be nimble, you've gotta be prepared. When you see something, it's like your right eye is going ahead of you when you're reading, and he was not. And so he read it on the air. He said the word, the colored people. And I didn't hear it live, I heard the apology. That is why diversity, equity, and inclusion, she's 22, and she actually wrote the word colored in a news script. I don't know where she's from, I don't know her, but that is why diversity, equity, and inclusion is still necessary. We don't know one another. So let's get the next question is right here in front.
Well, it was two things.
Or understand one another.
Yeah, one thing was you talked about Beyonce earlier and the whole country thing, and it instantly made me think about the fact that Darius Rucker has been in country music for a decade now. He's had #1 hits. He's getting inducted into the Grand Ole Opry. But opera. But he's not the black icon that Beyonce is. So she's treated completely differently, and you can also add in the fact that it's a woman. So that it's a double thing there. And the other part is April 2nd is school board elections across this area. And I thank you for bringing it up because people have to be paying attention. And it's dwindled down to these levels where they're trying to infiltrate and start to pass laws, start to make policies at these levels that are affecting our children right now. So if you haven't been a part of these conversations, if you have not actively done anything to be a part of that and to try to change that culture, then you're not helping enough. And we have to get out there. So
I would add, even if you don't have kids, go to a school board meeting wherever you live.
You
Go.
can watch them. They're mostly
watch
are
them.
online,
Or streaming,
so you
yes.
can look online. So please watch.
Yes, get an understanding of what is happening in your local school district.
Hello, my name is Cheryl, and a couple of things. My grandmother was a washerwoman. My aunties were domestics, and I was always taught that that was something to be very proud of, not something to be embarrassed about, because to be the best at what you do, no matter what it is important. But my dad was from Vicksburg, Mississippi. He was born in 1919, so a different time.
We might be family.
We probably are. I've been thinking that and my dad was in the military for 28 years too, and he was a master sergeant, so you know.
Spit in the tube and I'm going to get a hold of you.
Okay, exactly. So, but I have two, I guess, points. The first is I guess I am kind of a little bit of a radical, don't you say a word. And I always believe that when you are making change, the change has to come from inside, oftentimes, okay? And so I believe our babies and our young people are brilliant and they are making change, but I think it's dreadful that they're having to make the change and they don't have the support of us, the people who are older than them. I think it's also shameful that we have all these wonderful universities, Washington University, Webster University, St. Louis University, and so forth, who are all building teachers, but we're not building the competence in these teachers to be able to revolt, if you will, inside and to say, we got to teach African American and American history as one, that we've got to, be able to do this in a way that everybody benefits. And then the last thing that I will say is that, you were talking about the little girl trying to wipe the brown off, and I don't know why I'm getting binked here, but that's not an old thing. I went to school in Rolla, Missouri, okay? I lived that life. But my daughters went to school in St. Louis, Missouri, and went to a leadership camp in Cape Girardeau. My oldest daughter's only 28. And when she got there, the thing that was most amazing to her, because she called me and said, come get me, is that most of the kids there that are from all over the state of Missouri, so they're from Cape Girardeau and they're from Sykeston and wherever, most of them had never seen or talked to any black people, okay? And so they're asking her all kinds of crazy questions because our issue is not when they get to work, because I work with them when they get to work. Our issue is when they're 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. And we as a country, with the Department of Education, as well as what we're doing in our state, are very purposefully, all the adults, not doing what's needed in order to make the change that we know we have to make.
Thank you so much. And do you have a question? Or just comments? Okay, that's fine. Does anybody want to react or comment? We'll go on to the next question. And I pray that it's a question.
It is a question.
That's okay that you make statements, but we would love a question as well.
I have two questions. One for Dr. Hardin-Bartley. There was a gentleman here earlier today who asked about people, how they got on the school board. He had somebody help me out. He had a big question about it, and I would like to know the answer. And since you're here, I cannot remember the question.
Basically, how do people who are not qualified make it to school board, all these decision makers that impact us who have no educational background whatsoever?
Yes. Yeah, and then to the other gentleman with Missouri Historical Society, how did we get to a place in history where we had no information about Black history in the Missouri History Museum? And I'm wondering what other pieces of history we're missing from not just Black people, but other people of color in our community.
Veronica?
So in a statute, so you have to be a certain age, you have to have reside in the district where you want to serve, and you have to pay your taxes. Those are the requirements. And
Boom.
so it is important for you to be informed, and school board elections are under the radar mostly, unless there are some hot button issues. If there are no hot button issues, it's a volunteer role, so it's not a paid role. It is based on vote, so your community votes, elects you in. Most communities have 7 members. Some that are under state control, like Riverview Gardens, St. Louis Public, had an administrative board. So communities have become lax because we weren't seeing this type of push that we're seeing with not just racial things, but it's anti-everything that is about diversity, inclusion, and togetherness. And so people aren't paying attention. So you have individuals in these seats because the election turnout is extremely low. It is almost like not even like maybe 12%. So it's a low turnout. So I would encourage you to pay attention to your local school board election. Pay attention to what your school board is doing or what they're not doing. They set policy. They hire your superintendent. They fire your superintendent. So
happening.
their role is very, very important in the landscape of public education in Missouri. And I know we're a red state, but we do not have red communities. So we have power at the local level.
And then on the Missouri Historical Society, it's and I don't want to overstate because there are some big moments where the Missouri Historical Society did a great job of collecting African American history. But for the most part, it has followed what most historical societies have been, which is a repository for often rich white history. And so the way that changes is the way that we're changing it, which is we're now going out. We have been for decades, but now going out and trying to expand the stories that we can tell through our collections. And, you know, so I think we're a leader now. We have one of the most diverse populations when it comes to visitorship of any history museum in the country. You know, we were a hub for discussions during Ferguson. So we're a real leader now, but it took us saying this is a real absence in our collection and we've got to fix that. And it is all communities. So like right now we're opening an exhibit in a couple of months about St. Louis's LGBTQ history. And so it's saying we need to tell all of these stories. I will tell you, I have lost millions of dollars because we are doing that exhibit. I have had people say, I was going to give you this multi-million-dollar gift. I'm now taking it back because you're telling their story. And, you know, my conversation with them, and I've told our development department, I want to talk to every person who's taking money away. I want that to be a discussion with the president. And I tell them, look, there can be lots of discussions between you and your family, between you and your doctor, between you and the person you vote for in the voting booth. But when it comes to history, that's my lane. And we are going to tell everyone's story. But it takes historical society saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to change how we tell this history.
And what that means is those of you who have $25 and $125, you need to be giving because we know they're losing. We now know. And so we cannot sit idly by. Next question.
Well, I didn't have a question.
The former
That's
fire
why-
chief of the city of St. Louis, Sherman George.
Thank you. I didn't formally have a question, but I do want to say something about history. How important that is. As I look around, I'm history. Just turned 80 years old.
Oh, yeah.
God bless. But I remember what things that bothered me. I was 10 years old when Brown versus education. We're still fighting that war. 11 years old when Emmett Till was brutally murdered. 20 years old. Civil Rights Act, 1964. 21 years old. Voters' Right Act. We still fighting those battles. 21 years old when I was drafted to the United States Army. And for the first time, African Americans were integrated into a combat unit. That didn't work out too well for us. In 1967, we were simply 11% of the population, yet we were 13% of all armed services. Yet the casualties, we suffered 22% of the casualties. There's something wrong with that picture. If we don't know what's been happening to us, and we have to talk about that, but there's a price to pay for talking about that. I know there's a price to pay. Would I do it all over again? I don't know. I don't know. But someone has to speak truth to the lies that we're seeing in front of us to make us lesser than. We are not lesser than. And it puts us in a situation, our children, we can't encourage them if we accept that. You know, I'm gonna tell you something that I should have learned a long time ago, but I went through school and I was an adult before I ever realized that Hannibal was a black man. I admired Hannibal for what he did. Well, who I thought it was an actor named Victor Mature. You probably don't know that because you're not as old as me. But I admired him for his tenacity, his genius of battle, attacking the Roman army. Can you believe that? Across the Alps on an elephant. Then I found out I was a black man. I said, wow. I've given credit to someone else. And it shouldn't have happened. But it's difficult. It's difficult. And I understand. When your livelihood is threatened, making those decisions are very difficult. And sometimes I'm sorry I made those decisions because it jeopardized my family, quite frankly. But we are afraid to speak to the power, and that's the money, and that's the money. The biggest things that I see that we have, the two things, the three things, there's money in the middle. You got this parallel line. There's money on one end, it's race. On the other end, it's religion. Those are the stumbling blocks to our success. We have to have somebody that has the means. We're only 12% of the population. Somebody that has the means to make the difference. I don't know if I can make the difference, but we got to try.
One thing that is certain is that Chief George made a difference.
Amen.
You made a difference. You absolutely made a difference. Well, this has been an incredible panel. I knew that it would be. I had no doubt. And can we give it up for Jody's Boots? Can we give it up? Come on now. I wasn't going to let this panel end.
I said it too.
Were you looking at him too, Vincent? You told him
him
already?
I told him.
Okay. And then to this panel as a whole, to your expertise, to your passion, to your information, to your encouragement, to your advice, and especially to your wisdom. We thank you so much for sharing with us today and giving us such a charge to go forward with. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks to you, Carol. Thanks so very much to you for your continued support of Webster University, to me, and to this conference. So thank you. And Sherman George, thank you. Chief George, thank you.